Usually, people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. But this is a luxury that the oppressed does not have. There's a profound exception to that rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a true, clear, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those who know the truth must teach. Here are the facts. Our collective condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth, because Willie Lynch never existed. The truth is that those who controls the information that people receives shapes their minds, and those who controls the people's media images controls their culture. White oppressive forces exploits their control over the information that we receive and our media images to shape our minds and culture in ways that are against our own self-interest and in ways that instead serve their nefarious hidden agendas against us. It's what we call the Black People's Matrix. The reason why many Black people become upset whenever I say that Willie Lynch never existed is because many think that I'm discounting the methods of torture that alleged details that our ancestors went through. As with many fictional stories, there's usually some truth within them. The method of torture that the letter describes are the only part of the Willie Lynch story that is actually true. It was a brutal mental acculturation process that was implemented upon the minds of our enslaved ancestors to make them more obedient, subservient, and passive. But the torture process has nothing to do with the Willie Lynch myth. The process was known by many different names depending on what part of the South you were living in. But the most popular term of the process was called seasoned. During slavery, whenever an African slave was being sold between the white enslavers, the buyer would ask the seller, "Is your slave well seasoned?" The seller would reply, "Yes, my slave is well seasoned." And then to prove that his slave was well seasoned, he would strike the African slave in the face. If the slave demonstrated no response, this means he was well seasoned. If he retaliated or even gave a harsh look at his master, he was deemed not well seasoned. The way that the female was shown to be seasoned or not was more vulgar. The seller would pull up the female's dress and fondle her genitals. Her lack of response demonstrated that she wouldn't resist the buyer's sexual advances, therefore she was well seasoned. The season process was brutal, degrading, and cruel. The modes of torture included whipping, kicking, beating, starving, raping, branding, castrating, maiming, imprisoning. Many white enslavers whipped their African slaves until they were too tired to continue, until their backs of their slaves were gored with saturated of blood. Sometimes after whipping, some slaves were locked up in a dark place and deprived of food in order to increase their torment. Some of these slaves died of their wounds and starved. Those slaves that were deemed as being unseasonable were executed in the presence of other slaves to instill fear within their hearts. It demonstrated that the master would not accept any insurrection from the slaves. It showed Black women that their men could not protect them. It showed their children that their Black fathers could not protect them. And it emasculated Black men while showing them just how easily the white master would kill them. The seasoning process of our ancestors was extremely brutal, and it had severe psychological effects upon the enslaved Africans. But Willie Lynch did not exist. The Willie Lynch letter is mentioned in the movie The Great Debaters. The notion of the letter became popular after the Nation of Islam leader Farrakhan quoted parts of it during a speech at the Million Man March in 1995. Farrakhan later used the letter to support his claim that slaves only used the letter to control slaves. The document was assumed to be authentic, an account that took place during the 18th century and was used by members of academies, ministers, and activists to draw attention to the ongoing implication of slavery. But the letter is untrue. Willie Lynch never existed. The letter was actually written in 1970 by Dr. Corbina Ashanti, who lived in Durham, North Carolina. He disclosed that he's the author of the Willie Lynch letter. Dr. Ashanti confirmed it is a complete work of fiction. He described those symptoms within the letter based upon behaviors he personally witnessed amongst our people during his life up until the 1970s. That's why it appears so accurate. Willie Lynch never exists. It's a work of fiction. This is also why when experts examined the letter, they found it contained modern words that were inconsistent with its 1700 date. Dr. Ashanti said he wrote the letter in 1970 as a way to present his theory related to the current division inherent in the Black community. However, white oppressive forces took the fictional letter and spread it throughout the Black communities. The Willie Lynch letter gives the false appearance that sharing the story empowers Black people. However, the truth is the opposite. The spreading of the Willie Lynch story negatively impacts the Black community. Yes, you heard me correct. When Black people accept the Willie Lynch myth, the story negatively impacts us. Here is how and why. According to the U.S. Department of Defense doctrine of psychological warfare, it states that the most effective way to subdue and control a large targeted population without actually physically fighting them is by manipulating them to believe that their core problem is an internalized one. When people are made to believe that their core problem lies within themselves, this demoralizes them, divides them, and shifts their collective aggressions away from their enemies and redirect it towards themselves. It makes them resentful towards their own people. This is exactly what accepting the Willie Lynch does to Black people. It misleads us to believe that our core problem is an internalized one. When this belief system is embedded into the minds of our people, it gives us a false reason to have doubt in our ability to come together as a race, and causes many Black people to believe that our condition is hopeless. It also shifts our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects it towards ourselves. Therefore, Willie Lynch benefits a system of white supremacy. It's the hidden reason why white oppressive forces spread Willie Lynch myth into the Black community. The white society needs Black people believing that our core problem lies within ourselves as a means of keeping us demoralized, divided, self-doubting, and our collective aggression shifted away from white society towards ourselves. While most Black people think that receiving the information empowers us, it's actually being used against us. Willie Lynch never existed. The story remains true to millions of Black people because they believe they've witnessed behaviors among our race that are totally consistent with the Willie Lynch story. However, what is truly amazing is that these same Black people that claims too often witness the effects of the Willie Lynch syndrome are often totally ignore evidence among our people that totally refutes the Willie Lynch myth. Case point and proof. If Willie Lynch's story is true, that Black people are programmed to act as crabs in a bucket and never support each other, then how were we able to come together in such unprecedented manner to confront white racism during the 1960s? The remarkable degree of unity demonstrated among African Americans during the 1960s It was made evident by the brilliant organization and mobilization of mass bus boycott, marches, freedom riders, sit-ins that were peacefully conducted through the unified protest of civil disobedience. In fact, during that period in history, African Americans came together to confront white racism on every front through militant means, nonviolent means, civil disobedience strategies, and legal arguments with America's highest Supreme Court. These strategies resulted in the enactment of many civil rights laws that improved the lives of all minorities. While all ethnic groups possess the ability to bring about real change within the United States, only African Americans have produced such change. The degree of unity and organization demonstrated among African Americans during the 1960s was extraordinary and remains unrivaled by any other racial group in U.S. history. If Willie Lynch narrative is true, that we are programmed to never support each other, never come together, then how were we able to come together in such unprecedented manner during the 1960s? Oh, you've been ignoring that, right? The Willie Lynch narrative also claims that black people are now programmed to never support each other. Okay, if this was true, then how then did President Obama acquire 95% of the black vote? Millions of African Americans stood in long lines that wrapped around buildings for several hours to vote for him. On the night that President Obama won the election in 2008, millions of African Americans literally cried in the street, rejoicing with pride. If black people are programmed to act like crabs in a bucket and never support each other, then how then was that possible? How was it that African Americans stood in the blistering cold in Washington, D.C. on December 8th at the inauguration to watch Obama be sworn in? Furthermore, President Barack Obama received over 90% of the black vote, not just once, but twice, during his initial run for president and his reelection. If black people are now programmed to hate and never support each other, how was any of these noted things possible? The only rational, intelligent, and critical thought and explanation is that Willie Lynch never existed. Moreover, critically think and ask yourself, how likely is it that a British slave owner from the West Indies that had no formal training in psychology could develop a foolproof program that could capture the minds of not millions, but billions of black people for 400 years? Those who believe that myth should be ashamed of themselves, because it presents the least effective way of controlling generations of people. That's not how true brainwashing works. It's simply not. You'd have to be ignorant to believe it. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied and reinforced upon the minds of a targeted population. If not, its effectiveness will lessen with each new generation, not worsen as we move further on, as we witness among our population. Here's the black liberating truth of our plight and condition. The truth of our plighted condition is that white oppressive forces exploit their monopoly over information and media images that are fed into the collective minds of black people to manipulate us to think in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead serves the interests of the white society. Welcome to the real world. Those who controls the information that we receive shapes our minds. Those who controls our media images controls our culture. Because white oppressive forces control the information that we systematically receive and controls our media images, they've exploited this monopoly to negatively shape the collective minds and negatively steer our culture in ways that are against our own interests and in ways that serves their hidden nefarious purposes. This is the reality. It's the true reason why many black people are now self-identifying as niggers, call our women bitches and hoes, glorifies pimps, sags our pants, are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of discrimination and oppression. It's also the reason why millions of black people now believe that a Bible that was brutally beaten into submission into the blood-soaked minds of our ancestors by their ungodly enslavers now provides a path to our salvation. None of these beliefs or practices are normal. They're in fact asinine. Through the white society's monopoly over our media images and narratives that we receive, our white oppressive forces have socially engineered our minds to believe the unbelievable, to normalize the abnormal, to accept the unacceptable, and to defend the indefensible. Therefore, to think in ways that literally insults our own intelligence. They've turned our minds and culture upside down, and we've normalized it all. So much, in fact, that telling the truth now literally offends millions of black people. This is not some feeble attempt to absolve ourselves of our own responsibilities by wrongly blaming whites, as many of you have been programmed to respond. It's the absolute truth. Those who write of people's narratives and control their images literally control their culture, because white oppressive forces control the narratives that we receive and believe and controls our mainstream media images. They in fact control all aspects of our lives and tell us what to think and what to believe. Two social science facts are that people function based upon the information that they systematically receive. And a group's identity is shaped by how they see themselves repeatedly depicted in the media, because people become those media depictions of themselves that they accept as being their reality. White oppressive forces has weaponized this scenario against black people. The white society is waging a covert war against black people that most don't understand. Because we've been focusing on the Bible and Willie Lynch, we are easy victims of the social science they uses against us. Regardless of how intelligent people are, it is possible to control information and the image they receive. It's entirely possible to control what they believe. This is the hidden reality that we must understand. We've been conditioned to focus our mind on being holy rather than intelligent, to have blind faith rather than be critical thinkers. And this state has made us easy victims of their mental enslavement system. We must recognize how the white society uses information to socially engineer us in ways that aids them in maintaining their social dominance over black people. Although white governments publicly profess equality for all people, they are unrelentingly committed to the preservation of the nation's white dominance. There's also an immense fear of black unified retribution that exists among the white society due to their exploitation of black people throughout history. This commitment to maintaining white dominance and this fear of black retribution resulted in the white society deploying tactics against black people that aids that condition us, because they control our information. They condition us to perceive ourselves through a fraudulent identity that aids in maintaining their social dominance. And to prevent us from unifying against them, they inundate us with propaganda that condition us to believe that we are our own worst enemies. And this is how they keep us in this collective state. They keep us believing we're less than them and we're our own worst enemies. This is how they prevent us from unifying against them, and how they make us more compliant with their dominance over our lives. This is the hidden reality. We must elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome myth, and recognize that our enemies exploits their information, their monopoly over the information that's fed into our minds. Come on, think. The television goes into our homes 24 hours a day. They constantly bombard us with information. If you don't think that they're using their control over the media and the information fed into our minds to shape our minds in ways that serves them, you are extremely naive and gullible. If you find it easier to believe and that some guy, some Willie Lynch guy is controlling you from the past, rather than opening your eyes and recognize who's controlling your education, who's controlling. There's something, your mind has been dumbed down. There are 4 ways to manipulate the human mind: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the narratives we hear, the media images we see, and through repetition of these things, they're able to shape our minds in ways that serve their interests. The human mind is easy to manipulate when people don't know what's happening to them. When you don't recognize what they're doing, they're totally turning your mind around. When we see these symptoms among our people, we say, that's Willie Lynch. When we see our people sitting up straight up and talking to a white person, or hating our own people, or more afraid of our own people, these are all direct results of the white society's monopoly over our minds. It's very important that we function based upon what is true, because as I said in the opening, if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies that stems from them will be flawed. It is for this deliberate reason why the white society feeds disinformation into our community. Because the worst enemy for the oppressed is not ignorance, it's false knowledge. Because an ignorant person might continue to seek for the truth, but a person possessing false knowledge, believing is true, stops searching for the truth and become mentally enslaved by the lie. Willie Lynch is the lie that keeps you mentally enslaved from finding the truth. The truth is your mind has been socially engineered by the white society, is being constantly reapplied and reinforced. This is our hidden reality. Time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace, brothers and sisters. One love and peace.